Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are, and in general, welcome. Thanks for joining us for today's UNESCO Chair Lecture on assessment in education for sustainable development, history, and future directions. My name is Harald Hantke, and I'm very happy to welcome you on behalf of the UNESCO Chair in Higher Education for Sustainable Development at Leuphana University of Lüneburg. It is great to see participants joining us from different countries and time zones here in the room, in the digital room, not only in the physical room. And it's really nice to have you all here. And before we start, let me say a few words about the UNESCO Chair and this lecture series in general. A UNESCO Chair is a partnership between a university and the UNESCO. And the goal is, in general, to support research, teaching, and international cooperation around important global challenges. For example, in our case, sustainable development. Today, the UNESCO Chairs Network includes more than 850 chairs all over the world and 45 so-called unitwin networks across more than 110 countries. Our UNESCO chair here in Lüneburg is called Higher Education for Sustainable Development and was established in 2005. It was previously led by Gerd Michelsen and Daniel Lang, and since 2023, Daniel Fischer has been leading the chair, and I joined him as co-chair last year in year 2025. Our work here in Lüneburg focuses on education for sustainable development, sustainable consumption and production, and climate change education. An important part of our work is also the UniTwin network on education for sustainable development and social transformation. This network brings together partner institutions from Germany, South Africa, Greece, Canada, and Costa Rica. After this, let's come to our today's topic, which is both in general simple, maybe first, but also very challenging. There will be questions: how do we assess education for sustainable development in general? How do we move beyond testing knowledge? And how we assess can assessment support meaningful learning and positive change? These are just some of the questions we will explore today together with two wonderful speakers. But first, the question: how do we proceed in the next hour? First, we will listen to the both presentations, and then after that, we will move on to a discussion. So let's not spend more time. Let me now introduce our first speaker, Aaron Redman. Aaron is a sustainability, climate, and education expert at Aalborg University in Denmark, where he leads the assessment team of the Green EdTech project. He completed his PhD in sustainability at Arizona State University, and his work focuses, for example, on sustainability competencies. And Aaron is, beside this, involved in several international research projects and has also collaborated with colleagues here at Leuphana in the last years. This is only a really brief introduction, and I'm sure we will learn much more about his work and about him in the next few minutes. And the title of Aaron's presentation now is Assessment in Education for Sustainable Development, History and Future Directions. Aaron, thank you for being with us today. The stage is yours. I'm really looking forward.
Great. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Harold, can you hear with the speaker set up right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for showing up here in person. Thank you for joining online as well. So yeah, as you introduced, the only thing I would just add is I did was working here at the Bufana area. I'm wearing the same tie even too. I didn't even realize that. But back 6 years ago now, since that project wrapped up as part of Educating Future Change Agents, there's a few of my wonderful colleagues here as well from that time. And so it's great to be back here talking about assessment again. So I just wanted to take a real quick to get us started, take about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have time for some questions and discussion the rest of the time after we also hear from Caleb. So the first thing, just as a quick overview, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with the field of ESD or sustainability education. Really, has come to be a big and growing field over the last 20 years. A lot of energy, including work that we did as part of Educating Future Change Agents and other projects to bring together a lot of focus on what are the learning objectives and a fair amount of agreement about what sort of the core competencies in sustainability would be. While maybe not the specifics of the types of pedagogy and teaching and learning that we're doing, a lot of agreement about what some of the really big and important types and approaches, things like project-based learning, but far less that we talk about in terms of assessment, and that's gotten comparatively less attention. So that being said, we really, when we think about education, we generally think of the three areas of learning outcomes, of pedagogy, and of assessment, and all of them should be getting attention. And we see indeed, this is a bit dated, but at least in the research field, a lot of growing attention to assessment in sustainability, and that has continued since this study from 6 years ago to grow. When I did, as part of my PhD work and as part of being here as the Educating Future Change Agents project, looking at what research was being done in assessment, there's here some of the different types that we could think of in terms of the typology of assessment that was going on. But we found, which hasn't changed too much since then, is a lot of inconsistency in terms of what was being assessed. So, in a lot of fields, you might have a sort of meta-analysis to try to understand what's happening. And in ESD, that's pretty much impossible to do because every sort of assessment study is too different from each other that in terms of what they're measuring. And so the comparability makes it really challenging for us to learn from each other and really grow the field in general. We see a huge diversity of instruments, a lot of sort of one-off studies, a lot of single things. So instruments and things aren't being developed over the longer term. You see the most common type, and this is obvious here on this table here, which is most of the studies. So by far the most common way that people are assessing is asking students to assess themselves, normally through some sort of closed Dancer Likert scale. How well do you rate your ability in this area, or something similar? The final point that the return to here is that a lot of the research being done is quite detached from practice in terms of the actual what's happening in the classroom with the teacher. We often talk about assessment in this research space in a very different way than assessment is happening on a day-to-day basis for teachers in the classroom, particularly outside of higher education. So what are some examples that I've been involved with specifically? Just to give a few examples of over the last 6-8 years. Of assessment things that I've been involved with, and then go into a little bit of depth about some more recent work, and then I will pass it over to Caleb so that we can hear about some of the real exciting things that he's been doing. So the first thing I wanted to mention again is the Educating Future Change Agents project. We're really focused on to some degree in thinking about assessment from the research perspective and how we can measure the competencies across a lot of different types of courses and types of students, from graduate students in sustainability all the way to teachers who are being exposed to it just once or twice throughout their whole undergraduate career, and what types of approaches. So we tried, including people here, a lot of different ways of assessing, which I'm blocking here, and we learned a lot of sort of insights about what worked and what didn't, particularly sort of from a research perspective, and how trying to align, oftentimes in any single case, looking at multiple different methods as an important way to understand what's happening with the students. I was also involved with a project with UNITAR, a UN agency, focused, and they have a platform called SDG Learn, and they were interested in structuring these courses that are on this platform around the key competencies. And so what they wanted to do is have an assessment that students could take, or learners could take, as they call them, since these are mostly adults, could take to guide their direction. So we developed a sort of vignettes, multiple choice vignettes. They would respond in ways, and then that would identify maybe which of the key competencies they want to work on, and thus guide them to which courses would be the ones that they might want to choose to take up online. Another thing which I haven't really been involved with, but is, if you're in sort of the sustainability assessment space in education, you probably will hear about. It's a French organization called Test that's been around for quite a while. They have an instrument called Task that's out, which they're making the claim is a psychometrically valid tool, but it's very much focused on knowledge. They have the thought around the competencies and around competencies in general. But it's a sort of knowledge-based knowledge of competencies more so than the other aspects of it. So far, it's mostly targeted at the higher education sector, and they have a fair amount of uptake amongst a certain sector. You can see in terms of its use, and they have annual reports, and they're really focused on it, but really from this one sort of angle in terms of the type of assessment that they're doing. I had another example I just wanted to mention too here. A colleague of mine, Jordan King from Arizona State University, he worked as part of his PhD work on thinking a little bit, rethinking sort of the balance between self-assessment and how students can really be sort of leading the assessment process. And so through the course that he was in charge of, he was working with the students for them to develop their own rubrics for what their learning was going to be for the semester and the course. And so thinking of the students to some degree as the assessors or as the designers of their own assessment and as leaders of their own learning. And there's a paper out on that's down there at the bottom. So just to close out in the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about a bit of a reorientation that we've been thinking about in the last few years of thinking about assessment, not as this additional thing, but assessment and really putting the learning first. And so we're calling this sort of learning assessment because we're thinking about assessment more from the perspective of not just it's this tool that sits outside the process and they just are using it because we want to do research or we want to measure impact. But that assessment is actually in its role as a core part of the learning process of students. And so this comes about in some ways because what we've seen even, now having been working in this space for 10 years and looking back in it, that we're still not within the sector, meeting the learners' needs, that we're not seeing the sufficient innovation, and really most significantly, like assessment continues to be seen and practiced in ways that aren't aligned with what we hope and our ambitions for ESD and sustainability education are in general in terms of its aspirations and being normative and in being something that's integrative and in being the sort of the aspirations around it in general. So along with Daniel Fisher and Jordan King, we worked together under the auspices of a UNESCO-led initiative called Transforming Futures to try to develop a new approach to creating an assessment. Not so much a new approach, so much as bringing it together and focused in a really practical way. So the idea was to develop a really practical way that anyone at any level could take their assessment and move it closer to what we want to see be seen in ESD. So we have this step-by-step process, which has 4 stages that you go through and hopefully are able to move your assessment more towards being in alignment with ESD. And that will be actually coming out in July, officially published from UNESCO. So we're really excited. Hopefully we'll be following up with you on that as well. And so just to give a concrete example of sort of what happens when you think about this process, think about who's doing the assessing and what the purpose is. I just wanted to talk really briefly about this project in Denmark that I've been working on called Green Ed Tech. And we've been developing a hybrid learning platform for middle grade students to connect them with case partners and do work on sustainability problems offered by those case partners. And one of the goals here is to think about how, number one, that these are being run by teachers with no supervision, so teachers from all different disciplines with no background in sustainability. These are middle grade students, and how scalable is what we're doing. So we're thinking about how can assessment fit in when we're working within those spaces. And so going through that sort of DARE process of thinking about who's doing the assessing, what the purpose of the assessing is, we came to an approach where the students are working on a task, and we developed these standardized, basically slides to align very carefully with the task that they are doing. And then those tasks, the idea being is that assessment is not some separate thing that we do at the end and the beginning or something like that, but it's actually part of the process that they're working through in terms of trying to solve the problem. So as they think about these systems, the assessment is built in along the way, partly as a way to reinforce the learning, partly as a way to provide formative feedback, so that you're not just looking at the end, but that you can actually sort of catch things along the way. And partly just from a convenience standpoint that we're talking about, when you're talking in the real world in these classrooms, there's very limited time. These are sort of set, oftentimes ESD is this extra thing that's being added on. So it's not part of the existing assessment regimes. And it's not necessarily something that matters, so they're sort of adding it. So how can we build assessment in when there is such limited time? And making it part of the learning, part of the process is the approach that we ended up taking. So there's just some examples of the slides that we developed. And so that's what I wanted to talk about for today. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Harald, and then Caleb can take it over. We'll have some time for questions and stuff later.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for this. And thank you especially for the overview and for sharing your insights and experiences with us. We have already received a few questions in advance, and you will also be able to ask additional questions here. But before we move on to the discussion, let's first listen to our second presentation today. Our second speaker today is Caleb Mandikonza. Caleb is a senior lecturer in science education at the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. And his work brings together science education, sustainability education, climate change education, indigenous knowledge, cultural heritage, transformative learning, and decolonization. And he has also been involved in several initiatives for capacity development for education for sustainable development. As with Aaron, this is only a short introduction, and I'm sure we will hear much more from him in the next few minutes about him and about his work. Caleb, thank you for joining us today in the digital room, and the floor is, with these words, yours. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Harold. And thank you to Aaron for opening up the presentation. My presentation, is my presentation showing?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. My presentation is on significant learning, assessment for significant learning. And I would like to acknowledge my colleagues here. Prof. Overson Shumba, Prof. Hela Sitka, Maite, and John Bureken. This idea came out of a professional development activity where we, as the Southern African community, conduct professional development through what we call a change project. And the question was, how do we assess the learning on the project? How do we assess these change projects as they unfold to establish if our participants can demonstrate their learning abilities? So Prof. Shumba led this process, and we came in to support. I'm reporting what the group has done, and particularly on my side as well as as the practitioner who has been testing this. Excuse me. All right. Course of education, we always want to say, what is the role of education, and especially education for sustainable development? And it is mainly the core skills, and the others talk about the 4IR, others are talking about the 5IR, Industrial Revolution. And we look at some of these core skills and say, these skills are invisible. How can we visibilize them? How can a teacher who has been teaching meaningfully be able to find out if the learners have understood, the learners have developed the particular skills? And if you look at ESD, we borrow, as you know, from the competencies of for sustainability and eventually competencies of ESD. We borrow these and we want to see them, but these by definition, they are not visible. So what frameworks do we have that can help us to see these in the work of learners? And by the way, we need to constantly think about the three dimensions, three domains, which are cognitive development. Then we need socio-emotional development. And we also want to look at how people take action. And when it comes to taking action, yes, it's okay. But how do you relate the action to their attitudes, which are the socio-emotional attributes? And how do you relate that to the cognitive development? And of course, in terms of cognition, we have very useful frameworks that we have used, and one of them is Bloom's taxonomy. So we thought we need something that should help us to get to how people feel, how people think, how people end up behaving, and somehow explaining the agency that our participants have. And we then relate this to what our participants, who are mainly educators, are going to do in the classrooms. And we say, we recognize that assessment drives curricular activities and intended learning. And all work that is taking place in the classroom is the one that is contributing to what we call learning. And the models of assessment that we have at the moment are limited, because mostly we end up with cognitive development, aspects of cognitive development. Then how can we assess transformative learning? How can we better assess transformative learning processes and experiences? So we need to think all the time about the learning that takes place in the context of engaging with knowledge, and mostly formative assessment. And our thinking is that formative assessment is key. Whilst summative assessment is good for grading, etc., formative assessment is essential for the learning of the concepts and practices and skills. So I'll jump some of the slides, which you can access at some other time. But in order to answer that, we looked at the different types, the different purposes for assessment. One of them is assessment for skilled participation in society. We thought there are people who are developing skills in the society without necessarily going to a formal school. They end up with certain skills. How do we assess those skills? How can we assess those skills? Even if they are into formal education structures and developing particular skills like welders, we have carpenters, how can we assess how they are performing? And then we also have another one, the most common, which is assessment for mass action, and it looks at the mass assessments that we are doing, and it also looks at individual achievement. And the tests that we give, summative assessments that we give, all those, we thought they fall within that group. And finally, there is assessment for flourishing, and through significant learning. It is through significant learning. So when we assess our learners through significant learning, the frameworks, then we are hoping that we are capturing much more than we would capture through mass production, much more than we would capture through skills participation on their own. So in the end, it's a blend, it's a mix of these two approaches. And I've talked to this, yes, I've talked to this, and when you are assessing for skilled participation, it talks as well to the strategies that you use. Which strategies do you use? You use strategies that enable the participant to demonstrate their abilities, their skills, their competencies, their capabilities. Of course, all those distinctions will be for another day. I'm just throwing them here in the interest of time. And then the last one we need to talk about is assessment for significant learning. When we refer to significant learning, we consider higher order thinking, that there should be higher order learning, the metacognition. There should be deep understanding of concepts, engaging with ideas, processes, and systems. There should be interrogation and applying critical thinking on disposition, beliefs, values held by the self and others. There should be a process of affiliating to certain ideas, engaging, contributing, and learning in the group, relating to others in a group. And it should also entail engaging in actions that contribute towards a sustainable future, which means the agency. And in these, we can actually tease out or regroup them into the three domains for ESD. And when we referred to think significant learning, we noticed that in ESD, there is no necessarily a hierarchy of learning objectives. Because in Bloom's taxonomy, you start with recall, understanding, etc., until the learner demonstrates competence. But in this one, all of them are equal at the same level, and they interact, and at their level of interaction is where you find significant learning. And for us as educators to be able to tease out those different contributions, those different parts, those different aspects of what needs to be assessed for ESD, we developed some questions which we put in this diagram, which we call a flower diagram. And they include foundational knowledge, which include basically the content. Application, you can start by applying. Integration, you can integrate different ideas, different subjects, different disciplines. Human and ecological dimensions, how does one relate to the milieu? How do they position themselves in terms of values between humans and non-human humans? And then caring and Ubuntu, how does one place themselves within the context of the other people? And learning how to learn, that we'll look at learning for life, which is lifelong learning. So we believe that this is the way forward in terms of assessing for sustainability. We can start from any level, because this whole assessment process and approach, it relates very well to the pedagogical strategies that we use. We don't necessarily start off with teaching content and then going to apply that content. We at times even start with activities that learners engage in, and then they reason out through them. I think in the interest of time, I will stop there, but most of the slides that we have here are going to explain, and I think will be available for any comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caleb, for your presentation, and thank you again to Aaron. Both of you give us many things to think about it. We heard different perspectives, but also many shared challenges and opportunities. Let's now move into the discussion. I would share my screen, Caleb. Maybe you can end your screen sharing. Then
Okay.
we wait a moment.
My Zoom is misbehaving. Have I not stop share? Right.
Yes, thank you very much, Caleb. All right. Yes, we start now our panel discussion, and as already told, received several questions in advance, and I will start with those before opening the discussion here in the room. We received some more questions now at the time of the presentations. So the first question we received in advance to Aaron. I would like to start with a question about international policy and reporting. In recent years, SDG indicator 4.7.1 has received increasing attention. Do you think there will be a stronger focus on this indicator in the future, particularly regarding reporting on ESD, global citizenship education, and peace education?
Yeah, thank you. So I've actually been involved with a project where we were developing an indicator for 4.7.1 and focused on looking at just the more sustainability and environmental aspects. So we were looking at the integration of green themes into curriculum in 110 countries. And so that aspect has now been officially adopted as 4.7.1b. And so that's sort of the first time in the whole time since we've had the 4.7 in the last 10 years that we've tried to measure that in a, so to speak, somewhat objective way, as opposed to the previous things were relying on countries self-reporting how they were doing, which number one, they had only about 50 countries respond. Number two, you don't really know who's responding or whether they have any basis to respond. Number three, they're just sort of responding from their own perspective. And as we could critique self-reports from individual students, certainly the interests of who's reporting and what they're going to say are not well aligned with getting verifiable answers. So we have developed the approach now to look at curriculum, what's actually in the official curriculum of countries, and try to measure that in a somewhat objective way or comparable way across countries. And I think as the question asked was asking, because the 4.7 is much broader than just the sort of green themes. And so how is that maybe being brought? And there is another project that UNESCO is looking at to try to look at that from a perspective of gender, as well as from global citizenship, which includes some of the concepts of peace education as well. But how well can we apply this a little bit more objective approach to trying to get a sense of what's happening globally? So I think there is a lot of movement. We also now have the new recommendation, and they're right now currently working on the surveys being finalized for that, and that's going to be going out this year. So UNESCO is going to be collecting very explicitly data around from countries around 4.7 related to the new recommendation as well. So there is going to be a bunch of new things, not to mention the upcoming rethinking of the SDGs. I think will also provide a lot of energy around this.
Thanks for your answers, Aaron. Caleb, the next question is for you. The next question of the questions they received us. What are the most important good practices when developing assessment approaches for ESD? And maybe a second one, which is connected with that, which stakeholders should always be involved in the development process?
Thank you, Harold. Those questions are very tough. They are tough because ESD is contextual, and the contextual nature of ESD makes it a problem to prescribe. However, there are suggestions that one could make. One suggestion is to realize that the days of teaching content alone as education are over. And as we move forward, we need to find better ways to develop knowledge. And when we are developing this knowledge, we need to find ways of linking assessment with the teaching. And we also need to emphasize that the content that we have been teaching is outdated because it is out there, it is with everyone. So as an educator, if you go into class to teach content alone, you are behind time. So within the context of technology and AI and various sources of knowledge and experiences of the learners, we need to find ways to tap into those. And it also means we need, as educators, we need to provide the recipe for transformation of the curricula, because usually we are limited by our curricula. What is it that we can do as educators to help with transformation of the curriculum, which then should allow good teaching and good assessment in the new space?
Thank you, Caleb, for this answer. There was another question for you, maybe, Caleb, which focuses on competencies. Many people are interested in how we can assess complex competencies and not only knowledge. Based on your experience, what approaches have been most useful when assessing complex competencies such as, for example, critical thinking or reflection?
We have been grappling with that, and we have been experimenting with or exploring a number of approaches. And one of the approaches that we have taken here in Southern Africa, which we have, I have personally included into my teaching, is what we call a change project, where we are expecting the learner to think about something that they can do to transform something in their life, in their profession, in their practice. So for teacher educators, you embed it into the teaching that you are doing as part of the assessment. And then it goes along with other strategies like portfolio building. It goes along with others of reflecting at certain stages. I think that's all I can say at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Caleb, for this answer. Maybe the next question we got from the audience before is for you, Aaron, and I would like to turn the role to the role of the technology. How can assessment in the age of AI capture sustainability competencies without reducing them to simple metrics and numbers? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, and it's a great follow-up to what Caleb was talking about, because I think one of the things that I think the competencies offer us from the assessment perspective is reorienting our thinking around the process rather than some sort of outcomes. The goals when we think about the key competence, isn't that students have learned a bunch of content or a bunch of other things or stuff. It's rather that they've learned a way of approaching problems and they've learned a way of thinking. And so we need to be thinking about assessment in terms of the part of the process that the students are going through to arrive at, or to work through problems or situations. And so I think that really speaks for a different type of assessment that's trying to peek in on the work process of the students. And this is actually where, and we discussed this a lot in the Green Ed Tech project, and it's a future stage of the project as well, to be thinking about how AI could actually be offering us the opportunity to more facilitate checking in on that. I mean, one of the reasons a lot of the reasons assessments are designed are because it's very laborious to do them. It takes a lot of time. And so you're often designing things mostly around the convenience, you know, just in terms of what's actually feasible for an instructor or whoever's in charge of the assessment. And so that's often why you may say, well, we only can do assessment a couple times. We can't do it every day. That's just way too much. And so to some degree, I think the sort of optimistic case is that through AI tools, we could potentially have the opportunity to really promote assessment more on a formative end. That's checking in, for example, that the students, as they're working through, let's say, you know, a systems diagram, that the AI tools will be able to provide live feedback to the students on a very quick or rapid basis, or to point to the teacher perhaps to say, you know, we've noticed that student work right now is really sort of narrow. They're really only talking about environmental aspects, and their systems diagrams are missing any sort of aspect of social or economic, or that the scales are all really local and they haven't brought in any sort of international or national things. So you could think of some really sort of simple metrics in which it would just be not feasible for an instructor to be checking in on that on a regular basis, but through automated tools and some simple directives, you can pretty quickly be able to give feedback to push the students in the process of what they're doing.
Thank you, Aaron, for this insights. Maybe we can now switch to the first to the questions which coming up in the room during your presentations. There was one task, Caleb, for sharing a specific example of assessment for human flourishing. Can you give some specific example?
Yes, I have a very simplistic one, which makes life easy for everyone. But technology skills are failing me. I want to share. Yes. Here we have one example of a learner who was taught about waste in class. What is waste and plastic waste? Of course, they started off with sorting litter in the classroom, their own litter in the bin, and they realized that quite a lot of that litter was plastic. And then the teacher gave them a task to see, how can you make use of this plastic so that it doesn't quickly go to the rubbish dump, and go home and look for something that you can do to demonstrate your ability to recycle plastic, or to reuse and recycle plastic, you know, those other things. And then this learner went home and found 2-liter, 5-liter plastic containers and cut them, frustrated them, added soil, and then looked for seedlings and planted seedlings in those pots. They became pots. So instead of buying flower pots, he used these as pots, and quite a lot of them. where they started growing vegetables in their own homestead. And then the issue is, how do you assess that? How do you assess that learning that took place? And in order to do that, we suggested this framework that if you are going to look for foundational knowledge, you ask yourself the question, can the learner identify, understand the issue here, which is waste management, plastic waste. And then on the other side, you look at the learner explains what plastic is and how it has been made. The learner explains why single-use plastic is a problem in the environment. So in this case, you can continue with that example. And then you also look at application. They learned something in school, and they also had a small garden in school, a small bed for their class. They had learned how to grow these plants. And this learner was now growing veggies in the pots. So there is a connection here. We are already seeing integrating their agriculture activities and the natural sciences and plastic waste management practices. And human and ecological dimensions, you already see that they are thinking about themselves, the family, when they are growing food. And learning how to learn, of course, we hope that this thing continues and grows into something else in the future that we could not go through. So I cannot go through everything, but I have the example here. I just opened to share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. There was another example question for Aaron. Can you share a specific example of how you assessed ESD behavior and or mindset in a non-cognitive way or non-cognitive domains?
Yeah, I actually think that a lot of the times when we talk about behavior, it gets simplified down to things that are easier to look at, like, turning off lights or, doing things and it, like that. What we're seeing is when we're educating for students' behaviors that might be most sustainable or that could most promote that are likely to be quite different, especially if we're looking at middle grade or something, students 10 years, 15 years later when they're actually adults and are making autonomous decisions. And so what we really, when we're thinking about behavior, I think we want to really be reorienting when we think about that as a domain around the thinking and the process that they're going through when confronted with a sustainability problem. And so what we want them to be, considering. So when we think about assessing these behaviors, I think we want them to be able to apply this way of thinking across different domains. And so I think one of the key ways we can think about it, assessing and seeing whether whether the learning is happening is offering them problems in different spaces or different domains that they worked on. So perhaps in class, they worked on a problem related to water, and identifying perhaps behaviors and strategies and things are related to that. You could think, if you wanted to see how the behavior in terms of their way of thinking and working was operating, maybe you could present them with a problem related to energy and seeing if they're still bringing that same ways of thinking about the diverse stakeholders and how the things could operate within that space. So to me, I think we want to continue to emphasize rather more the process that and the ways that learners are thinking about and approaching problems and bringing those perspectives as opposed to trying to find the really specific concrete things that operate today but are maybe not relevant somewhere else or even relevant in a different context because the systems that they'll be in as people will be quite different, and so those specific behaviors won't be nearly so relevant anymore. Just an example of that could be things like single-use bags that in some countries is an issue, and some countries it's literally illegal. And so, to say that sort of some universal behavior doesn't really make sense. Rather, someone thinking about what they're doing and understanding their local context is the behavior that we need to foster.
Thank you, Aaron. There was another question, I think, for you both. I don't know who wants to answer first. It's about teacher competencies, so the other level for ESD. It's about what would be the main domains of competency, and then deeper, how you could assess then these domains. And before that, this is another part of the question, what elements should be included to assess teachers' preparedness? ESD, climate literacy, confidence, for example. I don't know who wants to answer this question first. Maybe Caleb can start, Aaron can add.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. I think when it comes to ESD, we need to look at the competencies of educators that are transferable, that they can be able to transfer into, into their learners. And we have been borrowing from sustainability competencies. And my comment is lying somewhere in between competencies, what do you call competencies? Then we have skills and we have capabilities. I think once we are able to marry those together, then one should be able to come up with a stronger framework for competencies. But at the moment, we are using the competencies for ESD and for sustainability, which we are taking into the classroom and helping to see if our educators have developed those. But the question is the one that I have posed at the very beginning, in that some of them are not easily visible. So when you want to make them visible, you have to come up with a good strategy that enables you to see them so that you're able to assess them. So what assessment strategies can we best have? I think it is a good discussion for another day. What assessment strategies can we have that should be able to surface these competencies, skills, and capabilities? I don't have an answer except asking another question.
Yeah, those are some great points, Caleb. And actually, I think this question is also an opportunity to tie together a couple of different things we talked about. One is when if we circle back to that first question about the global policy agenda, that we talk about integrating ESD across all levels, across all subjects. So what we've been advocating for, or saying is needed, is not, oh, we need a separate ESD course and students take that once, and then that's what we're saying. We're saying that sustainability needs to be embedded across the curriculum, across things. That means thinking about this. This is then, we're asking teachers from all different disciplines, all different backgrounds, whose sustainability isn't their prime thing, to starting to be including that. And so if we're thinking about that in a really practical way, and I saw this in the project in Denmark, where we're working with teachers from all different disciplines, and these are with no background sustainability. We have a chance to maybe give them a very brief introduction about it, and then give them this module for them to work through. And so the first thing I would say is this, not to sort of continue to repeat this, but this is where I've seen the key competencies really come out. You have people who have no background sustainability and feel like there's no way I can learn all this knowledge. And the basic ideas of the competencies and how that applies to a process and phases they can give to their students, the alignment between the competencies and activities and tasks, and that it works you through a series of things, resonated almost across the board for teachers that I've interacted with who have no background in sustainability. So that type of process, that there's a process, and what we saw in Denmark is that the teachers then are taking that model and applying it in many different ways. Of course, this is a huge challenge if you're trying to do a unified assessment, that everybody's implementing it in different ways. But I think you're providing that structure, and so then what you're asking from the teachers, you're providing scaffolding and a model in which they can take on and adapt it into their classrooms, is really the only feasible way in which we can hope to do this across the board. And so I think, to me, that speaks to the sort of the competency model, something that hopefully would be able to continue to apply 20, 30 years down the road when the facts on the ground, might be quite radically different, but they're still sort of applying that model and that way of thinking within their classroom and adapting it to the types of work and subjects that they're working on. And I think if we're talking about sustainability across levels, across the whole curriculum and different types of things, we have to be thinking about models like that where teachers can really be adapting it, and one that doesn't say, well, we need them to get a whole degree in sustainability now to be able to do it as well. Harold, I don't know if we want to give people here in the room a chance to ask a question, maybe. If anybody has one in here. You? Otherwise, no pressure. I just don't want you guys to feel left out here. No, we don't have any, Harold, so I don't know if you have a final question before we wrap up.
Thank you, Aaron, for proceeding. I have maybe a last advertising question. You can advertise a bit. Is there a guide to the education and evaluation of sustainable education you could offer, or something like this? You both. After that, the time is running. We have to close our session here. But the advertisement is a good place now. To place the advertisement is a good moment now. So, Aaron.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned in my talk, for the last, I think now it's been 3 years, Daniel, 2.5 years, we've been working with UNESCO to develop exactly that type of guidance. Because lots of people are coming and wanting specific tools, but really looking into it. It can't be some sort of, and you see this in the research, some sort of universal tool that we can just give to everybody and now everybody can do assessment, but rather that we could instead come up with a process or guidance that would make it really easy to do assessment. And so that was really what our goal was to think about what are the key questions, what are the prompts, what is the process that you can go through. And we have this process DARE, which stands for which starts with describing your assessment and appraising it, and then you reevaluate and redesign, and then evaluate the process you go through. And this guidebook will be coming out from UNESCO in July. It's already been tested by teachers and schools in 10 different countries as part of an action research project, and we brought that in and hopefully made it really accessible for both educators at all different levels. To continue to incrementally advance your assessment. So definitely be sharing that with this whole community and other people going forward.
Thank you, Aaron. Do you want to add something, Caleb?
I am part of an international project that brought us together, and which contributes to this meeting today. The Sub-Saharan Africa Teacher Leadership for ESD project, and this project involves 5 Sub-Saharan African countries and 3 European countries, and it includes, I think, about 14 universities, and then we are running a course, an international course across all these partners, especially the Southern African ones. It is called Sub-Saharan Africa Teacher Leadership for ESD Capacity Development course. And we are going to apply the framework for significant learning on this course, which is for educators. We are going to apply this course, this framework. But this is the first time that we are applying it completely online. In the past, we have been using it on hybrid training processes. So we are actually trying it out on this complete online course. I think that's all I could say. And of course, everyone is invited to join us. It's already paid for, and we will learn together.
Thank you, Caleb. We got more questions, but we are at the end of today's lecture now. Maybe you can ask your questions to Caleb and Aaron direct via email, for example. In general, I would like to thank Aaron and Caleb for sharing their knowledge, experience, and ideas with us. Thank you very much for these excellent presentations and for the discussion after that. And I would also like to thank all of you for joining us today, whether here in Lüneburg or online from elsewhere in the world. Before we finish, a quick look ahead. The UNESCO Chair Lecture Series will continue, and we will share information about future events soon. Feel free to connect us via LinkedIn, for example, to get more information about that. We hope then to see many of you again. And thank you very much for joining us today. Have a great day wherever you are in the world. Take care and goodbye from Lüneburg.